The scent of barbecue and fresh-cut grass filled the air, the perfect backdrop for what was supposed to be a perfect family moment. I cradled our 2-month-old son, Leo, my heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt a love I thought I shared equally with my husband, Ben. We were the picture of happiness. But beneath the canopy of oak trees and the cheerful chatter of the annual Miller family reunion, a venomous whisper was spreading. It was a poison that would soon erupt, turning our idyllic day into a public spectacle of humiliation. A moment where my own husband, in front of his entire family, would point a trembling finger at our beautiful baby and accuse me of the ultimate betrayal. He demanded a DNA test to prove his suspicions. He never imagined that the truth it revealed wouldn't destroy me, but would, instead, unearth a secret that had been rotting at the core of his own family for generations. The Miller family reunion was an institution, an unshakable pillar in the architecture of my husband Ben's life. Held every second Saturday in July at his parents' sprawling suburban home in North Carolina, it was a day of mandated merriment, of potluck salads, overly competitive lawn games, and the slow, simmering resentments that only decades of shared history can produce. For the past 5 years, I had navigated it with a practiced ease. A smile plastered on my face as I fielded questions about when Ben and I were finally going to start a family. This year was different. This year, I was no longer just Ben's wife. I was the mother of his son. I carried Leo in a soft grey sling against my chest. At just 8 weeks old, he was the undisputed star of the show. He was a beautiful baby, perfect in every way, with a shock of dark, wavy hair that defied the poker-straight blonde locks Ben and I both shared. His eyes were a deep, soulful brown, unlike my green or Ben's blue, and his skin, even in the dappled sunlight, held a warm olive tone, a stark contrast to the pale, freckled complexions of the Miller clan. I hadn't thought much of it. Genetics are a lottery, a chaotic tumble of ancestral traits. My own grandmother had darker hair in her youth, and I'd heard stories of a great-uncle with a swarthier complexion. To me, Leo was simply himself, a unique and wonderful combination of all the people who had come before us. But as the day wore on, I started to feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The initial cooing and congratulations began to curdle into something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was in the way Ben's Aunt Patty, a woman with a face permanently pinched in disapproval, looked from Leo to me and back again a little too long. It was in the hushed whispers that would abruptly stop the moment I approached a circle of cousins. Ben, for his part, seemed oblivious, basking in the glow of new fatherhood. He proudly paraded Leo around, accepting backslaps from his uncles and introducing his son to distant relatives whose names I could never remember. "Look at this little guy, isn't he a champ?" Ben would say, his voice booming with pride. "He's healthy, that's for sure," his Uncle Richard would reply, his eyes lingering on Leo's hair. "Got a good set of lungs on him." The first direct comment came from Ben's mother, Carol. She was a woman who wielded sweetness like a weapon, her compliments often laced with a subtle cutting edge. She cornered me by the dessert table, her smile as bright and artificial as the whipped topping on the strawberry pretzel salad. "Sarah, honey, you look wonderful. Motherhood suits you," she began, her eyes darting down to the sleeping baby on my chest. "He's just precious. So exotic looking. Where does he get that dark hair? It's almost black." I felt a prickle of unease. "Oh, I don't know," I said, forcing a light laugh. "Genetics are a funny thing, aren't they? My Nana had dark hair when she was young. Carol's smile tightened. Really? I always pictured your family as being so fair. Like you. She reached out and brushed a finger against Leo's cheek. And this tan? He's going to be a heartbreaker with the girls, a little Latino lover. She said it with a laugh, but the word Latino hung in the air between us, heavy and loaded. The Millers were proud of their English and German heritage, a fact they brought up at every opportunity. They were white through and through, and they saw the world in sharply defined categories. Anything outside of their narrow experience was exotic, different, other. I pulled Leo a little closer, a protective instinct flaring in my chest. He's just got a healthy glow, Carol. I saw Ben approaching out of the corner of my eye, a plate loaded with potato salad and a burger in his hand. He'd heard the last part of our exchange. Mom, what are you talking about? He asked, his brow furrowed. Oh, nothing, sweetie, Carol chirped, turning her blinding smile on him. Just admiring my beautiful grandson. Sarah and I were just saying how he doesn't look a thing like either of you. It's so fascinating. She patted his arm and drifted away, leaving a trail of cloying perfume and discomfort in her wake. Ben looked at me, a question in his eyes. What was that about, your mum being your mum? I said, trying to dismiss it. But the seed had been planted. I could see it. For the rest of the afternoon, I watched as Ben's interactions changed. He would look at Leo, truly look at him, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He started comparing Leo's tiny features to his own, to mine, to the old family photos, and to Mool, hanging on his parents' walls. The whispers grew louder, more brazen. I was sitting on a lawn chair feeding Leo his bottle when I overheard two of Ben's cousins, Jessica and Megan, talking just behind me. I'm just saying, it's weird, Jessica said, her voice a nasal whine. Ben and Sarah are both practically translucent. Look at the baby's skin. It's like coffee with a little bit of cream. And that hair. It's not just dark, it's curly. Maybe she has a secret, Megan whispered conspiratorially. You know the mailman, the gardener. They both giggled. My blood ran cold. My hands started to shake, and I almost dropped the bottle. I stood up abruptly, turning to face them. Their laughter died in their throats, their faces flushing with guilt. I didn't say a word. I just gave them a look that I hoped conveyed all the contempt I was feeling, then turned and walked away, my heart pounding against my ribs. I found Ben by the grill talking to his father, David. Ben was laughing at something his dad said, but the sound was hollow, forced. The easy confidence he'd had earlier in the day was gone, replaced by a tense, agitated energy. Ben, can we go home? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Leo's getting fussy. Ben looked at me, then at his dad, then back at me. Already? The party's just getting started. I'm not feeling well, I lied. I have a headache. David clapped his son on the shoulder. Don't let her drag you away, son. The women can take the baby home. You stay here and have a beer with your old man. The casual sexism was typical, but today it felt malicious. They were trying to separate us, to isolate Ben and pour more of their poison into his ear. No. Ben said, his jaw tight. No, we'll go. Let me just say goodbye to a few people. The car ride home was suffocatingly silent. The 10-minute drive felt like an eternity. Leo slept soundly in his car seat, oblivious to the storm that was brewing in the front seats. I stared out of the window, tears blurring the passing houses into streaks of color. I couldn't believe this was happening. I had given Ben a son, a beautiful, healthy boy, and his family was treating me like a criminal. Worse, Ben was letting them. We pulled into our driveway. Ben killed the engine, but neither of us moved. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "Sarah, we need to talk." "Talk about what, Ben?" I snapped, my control finally breaking. "About how your mother called our son a Latino lover, or how your cousins think I'm sleeping with the mailman, or how your own father tried to get you to stay and drink with him while I took our sick child home alone. What exactly do we need to talk about? About what they're all saying?" He said, his voice barely a whisper. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "About Leo." "What about him?" I demanded, my voice rising. "That he's beautiful, that he's perfect, that he's our son." He finally turned to look at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke my heart. The love, the trust, the adoration I was so used to seeing, there was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, ugly suspicion. "Is he, Sarah?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Is he really my son?" The question hung in the air, a monstrous, obscene thing. It felt like a physical blow knocking the air from my lungs. I stared at him, speechless, my mind reeling. This wasn't my Ben. My Ben, the man I had married, the man who had held my hand and told me I was his world as I labored for 18 hours to bring our child into it, would never ask me that. But this new Ben, this stranger sitting next to me, was a product of the Miller family reunion, a man twisted by whispers and innuendo. The storm had not just gathered, it had broken, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The inside of our house, usually a sanctuary of shared dreams and comfortable routines, felt alien and hostile. The air, thick with unspoken accusations, was harder to breathe than the humid July air outside. I carried a sleeping Leo straight to his nursery, my movements stiff and robotic. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to rage, to throw something, but I was numb, encased in a layer of shock, so profound it felt like ice. I laid Leo in his crib, my hands trembling as I smoothed the blanket over his small body. I looked at his perfect face, the gentle curve of his lips, the dark lashes resting on his olive cheeks. My son. Our son. How could Ben even think it? How could he look at this child, a child we had planned for and prayed for, and see anything but a reflection of our love? I heard Ben come into the house, the heavy thud of his footsteps on the hardwood floor, echoing the dread in my heart. I braced myself. He appeared in the doorway of the nursery, leaning against the frame. He looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn. The anger I had seen in the car had been replaced by a desperate, pleading confusion. "Sarah," he started, his voice soft. I didn't mean it like that." "How exactly did you mean it, Ben?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I didn't turn to look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on Leo. When you ask your wife if your son is really yours, there aren't many ways to interpret it. It's just, everyone was talking. My mom, Aunt Patty, even my dad pulled me aside. They were putting things in my head. "And you let them?" I spun around to face him, my voice finally cracking through the numbness sharp with betrayal. "You let those bitter, prejudiced people poison your mind against me, against your own son. I've spent 5 years smiling through your aunt's backhanded compliments and your mother's passive-aggressive digs. I held my tongue when they questioned our finances, our decision to move to this city the way I decorated our house. But this Ben, this is different. They are questioning my fidelity, my character, the very legitimacy of our child. And you stood there and let them. What was I supposed to do? He yelled back, his own frustration boiling over. Start a fist fight with my 70-year-old uncle, tell my mother she's a horrible person in the middle of her own party. Yes, I screamed, the sound raw and torn from my throat. You were supposed to defend me. You were supposed to tell them to shut their ignorant mouths. You were supposed to be my husband. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and angry. Ben took a step towards me, his hands outstretched. Shh, you'll wake the baby. Don't you dare, I hissed, backing away from him. Don't you dare use our son to silence me right now. You're the one who brought him into this ugly mess. He dropped his hands, looking defeated. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Sarah. It's just, he doesn't look like me. He doesn't look like you. I look at him and you what? I pressed my heart, shattering into a million tiny pieces. You see someone else. Who do you see, Ben? Tell me. Do you have a name? A face? Have you been picturing me in bed with some imaginary dark-haired stranger? The cruelty of my own words hung in the air, but I couldn't stop them. I wanted to hurt him the way he had hurt me. I wanted him to feel even a fraction of the humiliation and violation I felt. No. Of course not, he said, his voice anguished. I see you. I see us. But then I hear their voices, and I get confused. I need to be sure. Sure of what? That I haven't cheated on you. My voice was laced with disbelief. We've been together for 8 years, Ben. Married for 5. I have never, not for 1 second, been unfaithful to you. I love you. Or at least I loved the man I thought you were. The weight of that last sentence settled over us. Ben flinched, as if I had physically struck him. The fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow-eyed despair. He sank onto the rocking chair in the corner of the room, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. For a moment, a flicker of my old love for him sparked in my chest. I saw the man I had married lost and in pain. But it was quickly extinguished by the cold reality of his betrayal. He wasn't just in pain. He was the cause of it. I'm sleeping in the guest room, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I walked out of the nursery, closing the door softly behind me, leaving him alone with his doubt and our sleeping son. The next few days were a living hell. We moved through our home like ghosts, communicating only in clipped necessary sentences about Leo's feeding schedule or diaper changes. The silence was a constant screaming presence. Every time I looked at Ben, I felt a fresh wave of hurt and anger. Every time he looked at me, I saw a mixture of guilt and that same lingering suspicion. It was a cancer, and it was eating our marriage alive from the inside out. My sister Chloe called on the 3rd day. She was 3 years older, fiercely protective, and had the no-nonsense attitude I desperately needed. Okay, I just got off the phone with Mum, Chloe said, skipping the pleasantries. She told me what happened at the reunion. Are you okay? The dam broke. I collapsed onto my bed, the phone pressed to my ear, and sobbed out the whole sordid story. I told her about Carol's comments, the cousin's whispers, and finally Ben's gut-wrenching question in the car. Chloe listened patiently, punctuating my story with furious sputtering. That woman, she seethed, referring to Carol. I swear she's Medusa in a twin set, and Ben, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to drive over there and actually murder him." "Don't," I said, a watery, miserable laugh escaping me. "I need him alive to pay the mortgage." "Fine," she huffed. "But he's on thin ice. So what are you going to do?" "I don't know." I confessed, my voice thick with tears. "I feel like my life has just imploded. I look at him and I don't know who he is anymore. How do we come back from this? Chloe, how can he ever trust me again? More importantly, how can I ever forgive him for not trusting me in the first place?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her thinking. "You prove him wrong," she said, finally, her voice firm and clear. "You take away his doubt. You take away all their ammunition. You get a DNA test." I recoiled from the suggestion. "No, absolutely not. My child is not a science experiment. I will not subject my son and myself to that kind of humiliation just to appease Ben's baseless paranoia. My word should be enough." "In a perfect world, yes," Chloe said gently. "But you're not in a perfect world, Sarah. You're in a world where your husband is being manipulated by his family of racist morons. You can say I told you so until you're blue in the face, but that doubt, it's going to linger. It'll be the ghost in your marriage forever. Every time you and Ben have a fight, every time Leo does something that they deem different, it's going to come back up. You need to kill it. For good. Not for Ben's sake. Not for his family's. For yours. And for Leo's." I hated that she was right. I hated the idea of it, the cold, clinical nature of proving my own fidelity. It felt like a surrender, a concession that his doubt had merit. But Chloe was right. The whispers wouldn't stop. Ben's weakness had been exposed, and his family would continue to exploit it. The only way to shut them up permanently was with cold, hard scientific fact. That evening I approached Ben. He was on the couch staring blankly at a muted television screen. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I've been thinking," I said, standing in the doorway to the living room. He looked up, his eyes hopeful. "I'm going to schedule a DNA test." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a deep, shuddering shame. He looked down at his hands. "Sarah, no. You don't have to do that. I was wrong. I was an idiot. I believe you." "Do you, Ben?" I asked, my voice devoid of warmth. "Do you really? Or will a part of you always wonder? Will you look at him in 10 years and see the face of a stranger? Will you let your mother's poison drip into your ear for the rest of our lives?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "We'll do a legal paternity test." I continued, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "At a certified clinic. No home kits that can be questioned or tampered with. We'll get a legally binding result. And when it comes back and says you're his father, you are going to take that piece of paper to your mother and father and the rest of your charming family. You are going to make them look at it, and you are going to demand an apology, not just to me, but to your son, for ever questioning his place in this world. And if you can't do that, then you and I have nothing left to talk about." Ben slowly lifted his head, his face a mask of misery and guilt. "Okay," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Okay, Sarah. I'll do it." The decision was made. There was no relief, no sense of victory, just a profound, soul-crushing sadness. Our marriage was now hanging by the thread of a laboratory report. We had reached a point of no return. Whatever the paper said, the trust we once had was already gone, and I had no idea if we could ever find our way back to it. The clinic was a sterile, impersonal place in a medical park on the other side of town. It smelled of rubbing alcohol and anxiety. The walls were painted a placid, unoffensive beige, a color that did nothing to soothe the frantic jackhammer rhythm of my heart. We sat in the waiting room, 3 feet of empty space between us, on the vinyl couch, a chasm of resentment and hurt. Ben stared at the floor, his hands clasped so tightly between his knees that his knuckles were white. I held Leo, who was blissfully unaware, gurgling and smiling at the fluorescent lights above. I felt the eyes of the receptionist on us, the other people in the waiting room. They were probably here for custody battles, child support disputes, the messy, painful detritus of broken relationships. And now we were one of them. A statistic. A family fractured by doubt. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," a technician called out. Her voice was professionally cheerful. We followed her down a hallway to a small room. The process was brutally simple, almost anticlimactic. She explained the procedure, her words clear and practiced. She would take a buccal swab, a long Q-tip rubbed on the inside of the cheek, from me, from Ben, and from Leo. The samples would be sealed, labeled, and sent to the lab. The results would be back in 7 to 10 business days. The technician swabbed my cheek first. It was a strange, invasive feeling, but I remained stoic. Then it was Ben's turn. He flinched when the swab touched his mouth, his eyes glistening with unshed tears of shame. Finally, she approached Leo. I held his head gently as she quickly and expertly swabbed his tiny mouth. He barely fussed, more curious than upset. And that was it. 15 minutes and a few $100, and the fate of our family was sealed in 3 small plastic vials. The drive home was just as silent as the drive from the reunion, but the silence had a different quality now. It was a waiting silence, a purgatory. We had done the unthinkable, and now all we could do was wait for the verdict. Those 10 days were the longest of my life. We continued our ghostly cohabitation. I threw myself into caring for Leo with a ferocious intensity. His baths, his feedings, his naps. They were my only anchor in a sea of uncertainty. He was the only thing that felt real, the only person I could look at without feeling a complicated knot of anger and sorrow. Ben, on the other hand, seemed to be disintegrating. He lost weight. Dark circles formed under his eyes. He would try to talk to me to breach the wall I had built around myself. "I've been reading about genetics," he said one evening, his voice tentative. He was standing in the kitchen while I sterilized bottles. "Recessive genes and things. It's actually pretty interesting. Your grandmother's hair, like you said. That could be it?" I didn't respond. I just continued my work, my back to him. His research felt like too little too late. He should have trusted me, not a Wikipedia article. His attempts at reconciliation felt hollow, like a desperate bid to undo the damage he had already done. The trust he had shattered couldn't be glued back together with a few half-hearted facts about dominant alleles. My sister Chloe was my lifeline. She called every day. "Any news?" she'd ask. "Nothing yet," I'd reply. "How are you holding up?" "I feel like I'm holding my breath," I told her honestly. "I know what the result will be, of course, but I'm terrified. I'm terrified of what comes after. What if he's relieved? What if he just says, 'Oh, okay, sorry,' and expects us to go back to normal? I don't think I can do that." "You don't have to," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't just about him being the father. This is about the accusation. The result doesn't erase that. It just gives you the power. Remember that, Sra. You hold all the cards now." The email arrived on the 8th business day. It was just after 10 a.m. Leo was napping and the house was quiet. My phone buzzed on the counter. The sender was Integrated Genetics Laboratory. The subject line was, "Your case results are available." My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. Ben was at work. I could open it now alone, or I could wait for him. Part of me, the vengeful, wounded part, wanted to see it first to hold the knowledge over him. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the man I married, knew this was something we had to face together. He had started this. He needed to be there for the end of it. I texted him. 3 simple words. "It's here." His reply was instantaneous. "I'm coming home." He must have broken every speed limit because he was walking through the door less than 15 minutes later. He looked pale, his hands trembling. He didn't say a word, just walked over to where I was standing by the kitchen counter, my phone lying face down between us. "Let's just do it," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I nodded. I couldn't speak. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I took a deep breath and opened the email. A link directed us to a secure portal. I logged in. The page loaded and a PDF document appeared on the screen. Paternity Test Report was written in stark, bold letters at the top. My eyes scanned the page past the case numbers and the legal jargon, searching for the only thing that mattered. And then I saw it in a table at the bottom of the page. Under the column, Alleged Father Benjamin Miller, and beside the row, Probability of Paternity, was the number that would define the rest of our lives. 99.99%. A wave of something dizzying and complex washed over me. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was a bitter, vindictive triumph. I wanted to scream, "I told you so." I wanted to wave the phone in his face. But when I looked at Ben, the triumphant feeling withered and died. He was staring at the screen, his face ashen. A single tear tracked its way down his cheek, then another. A gut-wrenching sob escaped him, a sound of such profound self-loathing that it shocked me. He sank to his knees on our kitchen floor, his body shaking with the force of his guilt. "Oh God, Sarah." He choked out, his voice muffled by his hands. "What have I done? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I stood there, frozen, the phone still in my hand. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the ultimate vindication. But seeing him so completely broken didn't bring me the satisfaction I had expected. It just felt tragic. Our marriage was on its knees, right there with him. "There's more," I said, my voice strangely flat. My eyes had drifted past the paternity result to a smaller section below it, something I hadn't noticed at first. It was an add-on, a basic ancestral DNA marker analysis that the lab included as part of their comprehensive package. It was something we hadn't even asked for. "What?" Ben asked, looking up, his face streaked with tears. I turned the phone screen towards him. "Look." It was a simple pie chart breaking down Leo's genetic ancestry. The majority, as expected, was Northern European, English, German, Scandinavian, the heritage of both my family and supposedly the Millers. But there was another slice, a significant one, representing 24% of his DNA. The label next to it read, Iberian Peninsula and North Africa. We stared at it, utterly bewildered. Spanish, Portuguese, Moroccan, Algerian. My family had been meticulously traced back to England and Ireland. There was nothing like that in my ancestry. Ben's face went from guilt to utter confusion. I don't understand, he stammered. Where did that come from? The question hung in the air, a new and unexpected mystery. The DNA test had answered the one question that had torn us apart only to pose another far more complicated one. The proof of Ben's paternity was undeniable, but the proof of his family's history, it seemed, was not what he thought it was. The test had proven him wrong about me, but it was about to prove him and his entire family wrong about themselves. The secret of our son's skin color wasn't in my betrayal. It was hidden somewhere in his own blood. The stark white of the kitchen floor felt cold and unforgiving against Ben's knees. The number on the phone screen, 99.999%, pulsated in the silent room, a definitive explosive truth. It was a vindication so total it left no room for argument, and it had brought my husband to his knees in a paroxysm of guilt. The sound of his sobs was ragged and ugly, the sound of a man's soul cracking apart. He had gambled our entire life together on a suspicion born of whispers and prejudice, and he had lost in the most spectacular way possible. I stood over him, my body rigid, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. This was the moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times during the last 10 days. The moment of my triumph. But the satisfaction I had craved was absent, replaced by a vast, empty ache. Seeing him so utterly shattered didn't heal the wound he had inflicted. It only illuminated the depth of the chasm that now lay between us. "There's more," I said, my voice sounding distant and unfamiliar to my own ears. My gaze had drifted below the triumphant certainty of the paternity result to the unexpected colorful pie chart that followed. It was an add-on, a basic ancestral analysis. We hadn't requested a bonus feature that was about to become the main event. Ben looked up, his face blotchy and ravaged by tears. What more could there be? I crouched down not to comfort him but to show him the screen, my movements precise and deliberate. "This," I said. He squinted his tear-filled eyes, struggling to focus. He saw the largest slice of the chart labeled Northern European and nodded numbly. But then his eyes found the other segment. It was a substantial piece of the whole, a bold sliver of orange, representing nearly a quarter of our son's genetic makeup. The label beside it was unequivocal: Iberian Peninsula and North Africa. The sobs caught in his throat. Confusion chased the guilt from his face. "What Iberian?" "Spain, Morocco," he stammered, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. That's impossible. We don't have that. My family is German and English. Yours is Irish and English. This has to be from your side. Maybe there was a sailor or something, a great-great-uncle you never knew about." A glacial fury, sharp and dangerous, sliced through my emotional numbness. I stood up abruptly, looking down at him with a contempt I didn't bother to conceal. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice a low, lethal whisper. "Don't you dare try to deflect this onto my family. Not now. You have interrogated my integrity, my fidelity, my history. You have lost the right to question anything about me or where I come from. This is not my secret, Ben. This is yours." He flinched as if I had struck him. He slowly, painfully got to his feet, leaning against the counter for support. He stared at the phone, then at his own hands, then back at the phone. The wheels were turning, connecting the dots he had so violently refused to see before. The dark hair, the olive skin, the comments from his mother, the DNA result. It was a constellation of facts, and they all pointed in one direction: home. My mom. He breathed the realization dawning with sickening force. When she called him a Latino lover, it wasn't just a random racist comment. She saw something. She recognized something. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror, one that went beyond his own actions. "I have to talk to them," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of resolve. "I have to ask them." I gave a short, bitter laugh. "Ask them, Ben, you're past asking. You don't go to them with questions. You go to them with proof. You go with this." I held up the phone, the screen still glowing with the vibrant, inconvenient truth of our son's heritage. The decision hung in the air, solidifying the new reality of our marriage. The immediate crisis of paternity was over, but the war for truth had just begun. For the next 2 days, Ben moved with a grim, unfamiliar determination. The broken, sobbing man on the kitchen floor was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone quiet, coiled, and radiating a cold fury that mirrored my own. He barely spoke, but I saw him on his laptop late into the night, not reading about recessive genes anymore, but scrolling through articles on Spanish immigration to the United States historical census records and the complex history of cultural assimilation and shame. When he finally picked up the phone to call his parents, his voice was devoid of its usual warmth. I stood in the hallway listening. "Mum," he said, cutting her off as she began to launch into a series of cheerful, probing questions. "We need to come over. We need to talk to you and Dad about something." I could hear the faint, tinny sound of Carol's voice trying to pry. "Is everything okay, sweetie? Is it Leo?" "You sound so serious." "We're fine," Ben said, his tone flat, leaving no room for argument. "We will be there on Sunday at 2. We have something to show you." He hung up before she could respond. He looked at me, his jaw set. "You don't have to come," he said. "This is my mess to clean up." "Oh, I'm coming," I replied, my voice hard. "I'm not coming to support you, Ben. I'm not coming to hold your hand. I'm coming to watch. I earned a front row seat to this. I need to see their faces when the lie they built their whole world on finally burns to the ground." Sunday arrived cloaked in a heavy, ominous silence. We drove to his parents' house the same route we'd taken 2 weeks ago for the reunion. But where that drive had been filled with my happy anticipation, this one was a funereal procession. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, while Ben drove with a white, knuckled grip on the wheel. In the back, Leo gurgled happily in his car seat, a beautiful, innocent vessel of a history he did not yet understand. He was our evidence, our truth-teller. The house with its perfectly manicured lawn and American flag flying proudly looked exactly the same. But it felt different. It felt like a stage set for a tragedy. Carol opened the door before we even rang the bell, her face arranged in a mask of worried concern that was so transparent it was insulting. "Ben, Sarah, come in, she chirped. "You had me so worried with that phone call." David was in the formal living room, rising from his armchair. This was the room for bad news and serious discussions, a museum of uncomfortable furniture and dusty family heirlooms. We sat on the stiff, floral-patterned sofa opposite them, a polished coffee table serving as the no-man's land between us. Ben, wasting no time on pleasantries, placed a folder on the table. Inside were pristine color printouts of the lab results. "We got the DNA test results," he said simply. Carol's hand fluttered to her chest. She picked up the top page. David leaned over her shoulder. I watched them, my focus absolute, cataloguing every flicker of emotion. I saw their eyes find the 99.99% confirmation. David grunted a sound of affirmation and leaned back, satisfied. Carol's painted-on smile became brittle. "Well, thank heavens," she said, her voice dripping with false relief as she placed the paper down. Of course, we never truly doubted Sweetie. It was just a bit of silly family chatter at the reunion. You know how your Aunt Patty gets after a glass of wine? I'm so sorry you and Sarah took it all so seriously and went to this extreme. David nodded in agreement. That's right. A storm in a teacup. We're sorry you were upset, Sarah. But this is a bit dramatic, don't you think? The condescension, the complete refusal to accept any real responsibility was breathtaking. They were trying to sweep it away, to pat us on the head and send us on our way, the unpleasantness neatly resolved. The rage I had been carefully controlling threatened to boil over. But before I could speak, Ben leaned forward, his eyes locked on his parents. We didn't do it because we were upset, he said, his voice dangerously calm. We did it to find the truth, and you haven't seen the whole truth yet. He slid the second page across the table, the ancestry chart. Look at the rest of it. They leaned in again, irritated but curious. I watched Carol's face as she read the words, Iberian Peninsula and North Africa. The color drained from her cheeks. Her manicured hand began to tremble. The bright, confident matriarch seemed to shrink before my very eyes. David snatched the paper from her. His face flushed a deep, angry red as he read the label. Iberian Peninsula, he boomed, his voice full of derision as he threw the paper down. What in God's name is this garbage? This is a mistake. It's a scam. We are millers. We are descended from good, hard-working German and English stock. Protestant. My great-grandfather came from Hamburg, and his father before him. There is no Spanish blood in this family. He was shouting now, his identity so deeply threatened that his only recourse was rage. But his wife's silence was more damning than any argument. She was staring at the floral pattern on the carpet, her entire body trembling. This was my moment. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp, cutting through David's blustering. I spoke directly to Carol. The irony is just breathtaking, isn't it? I began feeling a cruel sense of satisfaction as her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. You, Carol, you were so certain, so quick to point the finger at me. You looked at my son, your grandson, and saw something other, something exotic. You used the beautiful, unique color of his skin and hair as a weapon to convince your son that his wife was a whore. And all this time, the reason he looks the way he does, the secret to his appearance, it wasn't hidden in my bed. It was hidden in your bloodline. It was your secret all along. A strangled sob broke from Carol's throat. It was the sound of a lifetime of carefully constructed lies collapsing all at once. David, please, she whispered, turning to her husband, her eyes pleading. Carol, what is she talking about? He demanded, his anger now laced with confusion. Tell me this is nonsense. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, washing away her carefully applied makeup. I can't, she choked out. It's true. She began to speak the words, tumbling out in a torrent of confession that had been dammed up for over 60 years. It was my grandmother, Evelyn. We were always told her family was from Cornwall, but that was a lie. Her father was English, yes, but her mother, my great-grandmother, her name was Sophia. She paused, taking a shuddering breath. Sophia was from Andalusia, in the south of Spain. She came here in the 1910s with her brother to work on farms in California. She was beautiful, but she was poor Catholic and had skin, as my mother used to say, the color of a walnut. She met my great-grandfather, whose family owned the farm. It was a terrible scandal. They ran away and got married. They moved across the country to escape the shame. They changed their name. Sophia became Sophie. They erased every trace of Spain from their lives. My grandmother Evelyn spent her entire life terrified of her heritage of the dark blood, she called it. She was so ashamed. The story filled the sterile room with a profound human sadness, a story of secrets and survival, of a love that defied prejudice, and of a shame so deep it had been passed down like a cursed heirloom. My mother told me the story once. Carol wept, looking at me with eyes that were a bottomless well of guilt. She warned me it could resurface after generations, that a baby could be born with the Spanish look. When I saw Leo, it was my first thought. The old shame, my mother's voice in my head. It all came rushing back, and it was easier. God forgive me. It was so much easier to believe you had been unfaithful, Sarah, than to believe our family's dirty little secret was finally out in the open. She dissolved into incoherent sobs. David sat in his armchair, utterly silent, his face a grey mask of shock. The proud patriarch, the keeper of the Miller name, had just learned his identity was a fiction. The foundation of his life, his pride, his prejudice, had been built on a lie. Ben stared at his mother, and for the first time I saw not just anger, but a deep, pitying sorrow in his eyes. "So you let me do it," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the betrayal. "You let me destroy my marriage. You let me accuse my wife of the most vile thing imaginable. You were willing to sacrifice my family, all to protect a secret that was rooted in nothing but bigotry and fear." Carol had no answer. There was nothing left to say. We stood up and left them there adrift in the wreckage of their own history. The drive home was a study in silence, but it was a new kind of silence. It was the quiet of aftermath, of processing a truth so seismic it had permanently altered the landscape of our lives. When we walked back into our own home, it felt like a sanctuary. Later that evening, after I had put Leo to bed, I stood over his crib, watching his chest rise and fall in the soft glow of the nightlight, his dark, wavy hair, his beautiful olive skin. They were no longer points of contention. They were his legacy. They were the story of Sophia, his brave great-great-grandmother. Ben came to stand beside me, his presence tentative. "I know sorry is a meaningless word right now," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "It doesn't fix what I did. But seeing my mother today, I understand now. That prejudice, that fear of anyone different, it was fed to me my whole life in little poisonous doses. And when I was tested, I failed. I failed you, and I failed him." He reached out, not to touch me, but to gently rest his hand on the edge of the crib. "He will never be ashamed." Ben vowed, his voice gaining a strength I hadn't heard before. "He will know about Sophia. He will know that he is English and Irish and German and Spanish. He will know that his heritage is something to be proud of, all of it. I will spend the rest of my life making sure he knows that, and making sure I am a man worthy of being his father." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the profound tectonic shift within him. The man who had crumbled in the face of his family's bigotry was gone. In his place was a man humbled by the truth and determined to be better. Forgiveness was still a distant country I wasn't sure I could reach. The trust between us was a ruin. But standing there watching my husband look at our son with a love that was finally unconditional, a love mixed with a newfound reverence for the very history that had almost torn us apart, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. but it was a flicker of something I thought had been extinguished forever. It was hope. Our story is a testament to how quickly trust can be shattered and how deeply prejudice can be hidden even within the people we love the most. The DNA test that Ben demanded, an act born of suspicion that was meant to tear our marriage apart, ended up doing the opposite. It forced us to look at the foundations of his family and confront a painful history we never knew existed. It redefined not just our present, but our past. The journey to healing is not over. Rebuilding the trust he broke is a daily conscious effort. But we are fighting. We're in counseling, learning to communicate and dismantle the biases he inherited. We are fighting for our love, for our beautiful son Leo, and for a future that honors every part of his rich heritage, free from the secrets and shame of the past. It's a reminder that the truth, no matter how difficult, is always better than a comfortable lie. If our journey resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up to show your support. Don't forget to share it with someone who understands that family is always more complicated than it seems, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about overcoming the unexpected. Thank you for listening.